The Rodcast with Rod Black, brought to you by NorthStar Bets. That's a win. Now here's your host, Rod Black.
Well, welcome everybody to the studio.
Nice digs.
Nice. This is like a talk show, and we got a great guest. My first guest on a couch. You can lie down if you like.
I might have to. Depends how deep you want to go into things.
And the best beard in the business, Chris Johnston, senior NHL executive, president, insider, editor. I mean, how many other places do you work for? You're kind of like me. We work for everybody.
Well, that's the name of the game now. So I got a couple other jobs, but this is my main one.
Can I touch your beard?
You can.
Just a little bit. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Okay, tell me before we get started. I mean, I remember you years ago and you didn't have the beard.
Right.
How did that start?
So it started back when I was working at Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. In summer, I just grew it. You know, we're off in the summertime in the hockey business, and you know, I liked it. And I actually went to a party at Nick Kiprios' house. He had like a summer barbecue, my colleague at the time, and our stylist Deb Berman was there, and she's like, "Hey, that works for you."
Yeah, it does.
And I was like, "That's great." And she actually had to fight a little bit at the, you know, I was never subjected to it, but some of the boss level to have it stick.
You got kind of a Conor McGregor kind of thing.
Well, I think at that time,
do you like that? No?
Yeah, a little bit. And look, I'm a little older now, but at that time I was younger, of course, and they actually thought it maybe gave me a little bit of gravitas. So now I might not need it. Now it's like, oh, there's a lot of gray in there maybe, but it really, I stumbled on it by accident, and I like it, and I'm going to keep it as long as my TV bosses let me.
Yeah, it's good. Well, you work. TV bosses, we'll see how that goes with all of them, because they get picky. Oh, this the flavor this week. Would you please shave your head? What?
Don't wear this color suit.
Well, there you go. You've had that. I've had that before too. I actually did this. I don't know if you, because I was doing so many events, and I wanted to see if this worked, because we might as well say it. We get clothing allowances.
Right.
Clearly, we're not using them today.
No.
But I wanted to see, you know, exactly if the public kind of was on top of that. I think it's a little bit different for some people, maybe analysts, because you're on camera more. So Dwayne Ford and I, we were doing football. We wore the same suit and jacket and tie for 10 straight games.
Wow.
And nobody ever knew.
Wow. I've never done that.
Isn't that crazy?
That's nuts.
So that might be something you do. Don't tell your bosses, though. But you talk about gravitas. You still clearly got you got the pulse of the National Hockey League. Maybe I've never really even asked you this. Were you a hockey player growing up? Did you love hockey growing up? How did you become this guy who is this insider?
Well, yeah, I did play hockey, and I loved it from like an irrationally young age. My dad immigrated to Canada from Scotland, and so he didn't play as a kid because he came when he was 19 or 20. He got into the sport. He was a big soccer player when he was a kid, and so he understood the importance of sport in terms of, you know, getting to know people. And so he kind of passed that on to me, but we were a family with no history of playing. So I played minor hockey. But I was watching games like crazy since I was a kid. And when I was really young, I just had a sort of a strange memory for this player scored this many goals. I mean, something that isn't actually practically, nobody needs to know that stuff anymore. We all have our cell phones if you need to look up stats. But I was just always interested, and I started saying at a young age I was going to be a hockey journalist. So I don't know why all those things, you know, you look back at this age.
Was there a writer or somebody, a journalist that you looked up to at that age too, that you said, hey, I want to be him?
I was a big Toronto Star guy. And so, you know, we had that. My mom was a big reader of the newspaper. She read every section but the sports section. So that was always left over for me with my morning, you know, cereal or whatever. And so, you know, Damian Cox, Ken Campbell used to write for them, Paul Hunter, you know, basically a lot of the writers that were covering the Leafs in the early 90s when I was growing up were the guys I was reading. And I just always wanted to do it. And so I don't know why that ever popped into my mind. You know, why didn't I say so badly I want to try to play in the NHL? As much as I did play hockey growing up, I guess maybe I was too realistic. You know, because you're talking about a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid. I mean, why didn't I dream a little bigger? But, you know, that set me down this path, and I've been really lucky, of course, to get some breaks and be able to actually make it my career.
Or a 7, 8-year-old. Maybe someday I'll come up with this thing called Amazon.
Exactly.
Or an iPhone. But isn't it funny how, and I was like you, I don't think I wanted to become a broadcaster. I did want to play, and it kind of fell into it. But I did study all those numbers, and it was different. I'm sure it's before the electronic age, when you were a kid and you read all the papers and the hockey news and you poured over all the facts and you poured over the rosters. For me, it was always the numbers.
Right.
You know, and I could to this day tell you from baseball to hockey teams, every number of every player. I don't know where my Chris, I don't know where my laundry is this week, but I remember that. And yet because of this, it's I don't think the memory works as sharply as it once did.
No, and honestly, you could ask me about a movie I watched last week, I forget the plot.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
You can remember every number of every player that you saw and the lines that they formed. Isn't that crazy?
It's bizarre. And literally it was not by design, right? I mean, there's just was something to do with my interest. You know, back in those days, there used to be sticker books, believe it or not. I was like, you know, getting NHL sticker books and seeing that. I got big into trading cards as a kid.
SO Power Play. I think you're too young for that, but SO Power Play was that SO Power. You get your cards or your stickers for going to fill up gas.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember those. And honestly, I was just obsessive about it. That's all it was, really. I mean, you're a kid, so you got lots of free time. I mean, where do you put your time? I should have been probably in the driveway more shooting pucks because maybe I might have played more hockey at a higher level. But you know, it became a passion, and honestly, I've been doing it since I was 18 years old. So I was really lucky. I think when you know where you want to get to, it's easier to get there. I mean, you still need breaks and all that thing. We could go over all the times. Maybe if this person didn't hire me, maybe I end up pumping gas somewhere, who knows? But you know, there's got to be luck, but also I think knowing where I wanted to get to made it a little easier.
And you have to have a real affection in our business for craft dinner at a very young age. I was 18 too. I got in the business at that age, and you know, you mentioned those stickers and that, and you know, the worship that you had. For me, it was also broadcasters, but hockey players and athletes. Was there a player or an athlete that the first one, your first ever autograph that you can remember, or you know, somebody that you really cheered for and you got finally a chance to meet that person?
Well, I really liked the Blue Jays of that era because, of course, they were great as I was a kid, and they were flirting with it, and they finally won when I was still at the right age to remember it. Yeah. I remember John Olerud came to my hometown, which is Cobourg, Ontario, a small little place. Yeah. We lined up for 3 hours to get his autograph. It was at one of the card shops at the time. So that was pretty cool. Like, that was a distinct memory because, you know, at pre-internet age, like, the players felt really far away, right? They didn't have a Twitter or an Instagram account. You know, today I think fans can interact directly with an athlete or feel like it's more direct than then. Like,
they couldn't give you a selfie.
Right.
You know, it was an autograph.
Right. But I actually got to see this guy that had been on my team. It just felt far away. And
He's a big dude too. Remember?
He was,
John was a big guy.
And he wasn't wearing the batting helmet he used to have to wear in the field. But that was a big memory. But in terms of hockey influences, you know, Doug Gilmour I was a massive Doug Gilmour fan.
That was during the time too. 92, 93. That was, people forget how great the Leafs were.
Well, and they had been so bad essentially my whole life. Yeah. And they make that trade, and as a kid, it was like a sugar rush. Like, there's something about him I found very captivating. I'll tell you this, Rod, and you would have had this experience getting to know athletes, you know, as you get older. I once saw Doug Gilmour when I was early in the business. Like, I walked around the corner in the press box, and he was there, and literally, even as an adult, my heart hit my throat just because there was something inside me remembering that from youth. But, like, you know, to get to know Sidney Crosby or Auston Matthews, like the today's stars, it doesn't have the same effect because I'm an adult and I don't view it the same way. But even just seeing him as an adult, like, still kind of like shook something in me. And so I think if you're a sports fan, I think, you know, when you're age 12 or 13, you really hold on to a lot of those memories. And even as a 40-year-old now, I still resonate particularly with like that time in Toronto sports in the early 90s, whether it was the Leafs, the Jays. I even watched a lot of Argos back in those days. And of course they won the Grey Cup in 91. Like, I just remember those teams so well. And that really set me on this path, I think, in some ways too.
Yeah. You value, I think, too. And the word hero is used wrongly because, you know, they're sports.
Right.
They're champions, they're icons, they're stars. But if you think back to that era, and I was like, again, working in that era, it was different. Do you find, because they became your friend, in many ways they became your friends, and it was hard to report on your friends.
Right.
You know, for whatever reason, you were very close. It was a close inner circle. The circle is wider now, certainly, but close within, you have to get into that little cocoon for a player. To be closer to that player, it'd be very difficult, I'd imagine, because do you find they're more guarded because of social media with the reportage that you have to do?
So some of this might be
trust, I guess.
Right. Some of this might be age-based. I actually finding it today a little bit easier, oddly. I don't know if that's because because I was quite young when I first went into NHL dressing rooms, and that was at a time when teams were older. So like when I first went into the Leafs dressing room, that's sort of the Ty Domi, Darcy Tucker era. Those guys were actually 10 or 12 years older than me. And so I didn't.
Who's this kid?
Maybe it was a little.
Kid, he needs to grow a beard.
And certainly it was intimidating. Those guys weren't afraid. It was a different atmosphere media-wise. Those guys weren't afraid to go back and forth with reporters a little bit. And I was brand new. I didn't have. So like it was harder at that time. Obviously, I've gotten to know some of those guys post-career a little bit better, but in the moment, it was harder for me maybe to identify with them. I find now a lot of athletes, because they're used to sharing their life on Instagram.
They're more open books for sure.
I just find that they're more likely to share their story with you. I'm not saying I'm best friends with them. I don't hang out with these guys. It's nothing like that. But I find professionally, oddly, the biggest challenge, of course, the last 2 years is the pandemic. You can't stand face to face with them. I mean, finally, this is going to be the first normal season, Rod, since 2019-20, where reporters are allowed back in the dressing room. It's just going to be more what I would call a normal course of business. But I actually find today's athletes pretty open to sharing their stories, their lives, talking about their parents, all that stuff, because they've grown up where basically everything is out there on the internet already.
Yeah, and they're also all brands.
Right.
And here's the other thing. They can also help navigate their story a little bit. And I think back to that era is that what was put in print stayed in print. Now it stays up in the internet. So maybe that is in a roundabout way better for them these days, that they know they can also control their brand, not their story necessarily, but their brand a little more.
For sure. I mean, it's evolved, and it's evolving at a level I'm trying to keep up with. I want to have we're talking about like where my career started. I want to have a future career here too. Yeah. And you see things like the Players Tribune come along. Certainly an athlete that's very active on Instagram or Twitter can really say what they can control their story.
They're all broadcasters and writers.
Right. I mean, a lot of them aren't doing it in hockey. Like there's not strong personalities, but I look at like Marcus Stroman, for example. I mean,
LeBron James.
Right. They tell you what they want you to hear. I mean, you don't have to just trust a certain trusted reporter or whatever. I mean, but it's hard too. Like some of these guys, look, first of all, they have a demanding job. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure a lot of them want to do it themselves, but if you wanted to, I think athletes could cut us right out of the middle, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so we could talk all day about all things, but tell us about your role here now with NorthStar. You have a lot of different roles, but and what we can expect to see from Chris Johnston over the next few months, few years, few decades, over the next century. But what can we expect to see? I mean, you're clearly providing a lot of content here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm covering the NHL, and so I'm going to tell you about the stories you need to know about. A big piece of that, Rod, is going to be a launching of a newsletter this season, which you can subscribe to in your email. It'll arrive Monday morning in your inbox, where I'm taking questions from readers, what they're interested in. I'm going to tell you about the big stories of the day, some takes, some exclusive interviews, that kind of thing. And that's a big piece of the coverage, but, it's also weighing in on, a big trade, a firing, a hiring, that type of thing as well. And a pretty strong focus being here in Toronto on what's happening with the Leafs, because as you know, whatever's happening, it's a story, even if sometimes if not a whole lot's going on.
Honestly, sometimes you think that, there was some sort of seismic event that the rest of the hockey world fell off the cliff and it all exists in Toronto. And that's a challenge. We've come through, we're still in it, but we're come through COVID in many ways. Very different seasons the last 3 seasons, including the last one, and another short season before the regular season. What did you make of this off season? I want to get to last season in Colorado and everything, but what did you make of this off season? There seemed to be a lot of movement and a lot of shockwaves, actually.
For the NHL, for sure. I mean, like, we're not used to seeing this much upheaval of a team. I mean, the Calgary Flames, I'm sure you might have a question specific to what they did, but just seeing star players leave and come in, be replaced so quickly, really in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, and then the Kadri signing a little bit later for Brad Treliving. But we saw more of a shift of power, and I actually think we can connect it on some level back to the pandemic, right? What the pandemic did, the NHL is a hard salary cap. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it's a fact. And because of the pandemic, the league didn't make the money it would have normally made if the seasons had gone as normal. And so a lot of teams are feeling the squeeze for that. And I think so. One of the trickle down effects is you've seen teams have to be creative or make more bold moves than you would have in the past. And that's going to continue, in my view. I mean, it's probably 2 years before we're back to normal in terms of the business of the league. and that means a big salary cap jump. And so there's a lot of pressure on these GMs managing their rosters. And I think there's a lot of fireworks. Yeah. Let's face it. I mean, the NHL is not. I think the cap in some ways has been bad for fireworks because it's harder to make trades. I mean, there's so many other considerations.
You got to be a mathematician. You got to know all the algorithms, sabermetrics, yada yada. But you got to be able to fit everything into this cap room.
Well, and most teams have a mathematician on board. I mean, they might not be a true mathematician, but someone whose job every day is to manage their cap situation, to be aware of those numbers, to say, yeah, we could trade for the player X on this team, but we have to do, there's all these machinations connected to it. It's become far more complex. What it's done is it's guaranteed the owners get half of the money, but it's really made the business of hockey far more complex than it was, prior to the 04-05 lockout. And then when you all of a sudden put the brakes on the cap, of course, there's downstream effects to that. And I think that leads to this kind of summer. I think next summer, there's no reason to think we won't see more of those kind of fireworks.
And hard. Maybe I'll ask you: is it harder to create a dynasty And I don't want to say old days. Old days might be even 10 years ago when you could just go out and buy players, which you can't do now.
It's almost impossible. I'm not sure if we'll consider them a dynasty team, but
we're talking even a back-to-back champion is a dynasty now.
Well,
and dynasties used to be like 4 or 5 in a row.
Sure, but you look at Tampa. I mean, they were in a Cup final in 2015. They lost in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final a couple times, 16 and 19, I believe. They won in 20 and 21, and they were in the final in 2022. That might be a modern day hockey dynasty. I mean, I don't know if we'll use the D word, but that's the
different
high
definition,
bar.
Right?
Well, and how have they done it? Right?
Yeah.
They live in Florida, where there happens to be no state income tax. They got their top players to take probably below market value. That slotted everyone in behind them. They're managed really smart. I'm not saying that this was all cooked up for them, but Julian Brisebois and Steve Yzerman before him did a great job managing that roster, but they had some advantages there. And those players have, Victor Hedman he was great in 2015. He's still great in 2023. So that's been a key to their success. And then they've cycled behind them. But, I look at their summer this year, they've lost Andre Palat, for example, who's such a key part of that whole thing. One of those guys that will never be the headline grabber, but they get weaker because he's got to go. Just, again, the cap kind of dictates it. So I don't see how any team is going to have that run. Even Colorado, you love their team. We all see Cale Makar, right? 21, 22 years old.
I like Blink 182 too.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I think that's the greatest thing.
Of course, but they're going, Cale Makar is going to the Hall of Fame. I'm willing to say that today. He's 22. Yeah. Look at the season he just had. The Norris, the Conn Smythe, he wins a cup. If you look at his points per game.
2 of the top 5 players in the game.
Right, and he's challenging some of Bobby Orr's numbers in terms of to this point in his career. I mean, Nobody wants to be compared to Bobby Orr, right? It's almost preposterous with the career Bobby had. So anyway, they have that piece in place. They have Nathan McKinnon, but they lost Kadri. They're going to lose more guys because of the cap, and so it's just so hard. It is. I'm actually sympathetic to the teams, honestly. I mean, in a certain way, I think it can be fun because you can be in Montreal right now and say hey. Right now, okay, so the Canadians, I don't expect to make much noise this year, but they may be not that far off from getting there. But if you don't strike in those couple years, all of a sudden you're on the other side before you've won anything.
And they make news with Nick Suzuki as their new captain.
Right. Bold choice, right? I mean, we're talking about a kid in a real NHL marketplace. I mean, it's impossible to overstate how different it is, I think, to play in Toronto and Montreal. Maybe we put Vancouver there. They have a pretty lively discussion around their team and a lot of scrutiny. A couple of the U.S. markets, but really there's 5 or 6, 7 at most markets where the team is the going concern in that city. And of course, in Montreal, it's in 2 official languages. It's not Nick Suzuki's fault in a sense. He speaks one of them. He grew up in Ontario, and that's already become a topic of conversation.
It's like playing for the Yankees,
right?
Like playing for Manchester United, whoever it might be. You're playing for the team,
right? And look, he signed long term, so I get it. And look, they're ushering in a new age. I can see the choice, but look, Brendan Gallagher was sitting right there.
Yeah.
And for a lot of years, everyone thought he would be the next guy after Shea Weber. I think it would be an easier fit given his age, but his performance hasn't been great the last 2 seasons, and so they've gone to the future. But it's a lot to put on his shoulders. It's not a prediction that he can't handle it or anything like that, but I think it's an interesting choice, and I like the direction of their organization. Quite frankly, I think once you realize,
look what they did 2 years ago.
Right
now, again, the Carey Price thing is still that question mark hovering over that franchise.
Exactly, and it sounds unfortunately Carey's not going to play again, right? And Shea Weber never played another game after they lost the cup in 2021 to Tampa. I mean, that was his last game in the league, and essentially, Carey's played a little bit, but that was the end for those two guys, unfortunately. But I think they've realistically approached their problems. It took a management change. It's hard. Marc Bergevin built that team. Probably hard for him to contemplate blowing it up. It's easier for someone new to come in and Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes and attack that problem. But I like where they're set up to go. But again, all of a sudden at some point everyone's going to start getting paid. Juraj Slavkovsky's just starting his career, first overall pick last year. Won't be long before he's making real money and all that kind of thing.
Somebody getting paid. And that's kind of like the world of sport now. It's such this is not just hockey. No other sport is immune to it either. But and I want to get to Toronto in a minute, but back to Calgary. When you heard about Johnny Hockey making that move, then Matthew Tkachuk right after him, and then you're thinking, and I'm sure the people in Calgary are going, this is going down in flames. Pardon the pun. But now, Brad Treliving, what he was able to do. I don't know if preconceived or how it fell in his lap. What did you make of that whole situation from going from rock bottom, maybe a rebuild, to being a major contender still?
He might be better off. That's the irony here, right? Yeah. And it's not a knock on Tkachuk or Goodrow, but they'd been there for a number of years along with Sean Monahan. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, they had a couple great regular seasons. They won the Western Conference a few years ago and lost in round 1 to the Avalanche. Maybe this is a more playoff design team. We've seen Nazem Kadri's success. Clearly what he brings isn't just offense, even though he just had his best offensive season, but, style of play, I think that works in the playoffs. They might have ended up ahead and it looked like a freaking disaster 3 days into free agency. And that's amazing. And remember, they were left at the altar by Johnny Gaudreau. Mm-hmm. They negotiated with him until 24 hours before free agency opened. They offered him much more money than he ended up signing for in Columbus. It ended up being a personal family lifestyle decision for Gaudreau. But to lose,
which is fine, but to leave it to the last minute.
Sure. I mean, it's his prerogative. He's earned that right? I mean, but I will say, if you're just looking at it from the Flames' perspective, front office, you get that, and then you go to Tkachuk because he's priority number 2, and he doesn't want to stick around. He doesn't want to sign a long-term deal. I mean, to pull out what they did is amazing.
Huberdeau to sign long-term right away. To not only that, to leave Florida, come back home to Canada, and then say, sign me long-term.
Right.
I mean, that takes stones too.
It does. And Mackenzie Weegar, part of that deal, they're negotiating now to extend him. I mean, that could have been its own sort of set of disasters. Yeah. It's almost like pushing your problems down a year, right? Because if Huberdeau and Weegar come in and don't want to sign contracts, they want to play out that season. Well, what's the conversation in Calgary today? It's all about, will they stay? Will they trade them at the deadline? How do you handle this? I mean, really, they managed to calm the situation, and then they signed Nazem Kadri, which probably doesn't happen, I'm guessing, without all that falling into place. Mm-hmm. Because Kadri had a few different offers on the table, and he wants to win still. He doesn't want to be one cup and done. He wants to go somewhere where he believes he's got a chance to, first of all, make his money, as he should do as a free agent coming off a great season, but also be in a position to win. And so it's a master stroke. I think some things had to fall in place there, but, give Treliving credit. To me, he's always been an aggressive GM. A bit of a cowboy. Maybe it fits the...
His dad's on Dragon's Den.
Right.
That's all I gotta say.
It fits the profile of the team and the city. And I will not be surprised, Rod, if we're doing this, come next year's playoffs and we're saying this is a top 3 team to win the cup. I could see it working that well because I like Jacob Markstrom, their goaltender. I think their defense is top notch as it is. And I don't think they've lost all that much. Maybe a little bit of offense, but I'm not sure a Daryl Sutter coach team is lacking offensively, right? If you look at their second round loss to Edmonton this year, it was all the goals going in. Markstrom, was not at his best at the wrong time. It was kind of a strange series with, 9-6 game or something like that. Anyway, the point is that I think that this team is set up now for probably more success than it was coming in.
And it goes to show you how stories are fleeting, fame is fleeting in the league, and how narratives can change.
Right.
You go back a few years, Nazem Kadri's narrative. I mean, and I really like Naz as a person and what he's done. Think about the monies that he's now donating to science, to see what happened to him, and to be able to take what he did and to have the cup confidence that he has now. I mean, he's gonna go to a team, and he's arguably one of their best leaders now.
For sure. And, I'm not one to necessarily second guess because it's so easy. First of all,
like I say, it changes all the time, right?
On our side of the microphone, it's so easy to look at this situation and that. But, I look back on the decision to trade Kadri, and to me, it's the biggest misstep the Leafs have made. Because if you got the right deal, I think it makes sense. My view is that they went into that offseason and he was done there. And so they were, trying to get any deal. I mean, they almost traded him to Calgary, right? He had a no trade clause at the time.
And they still don't have a guy like him.
And exactly. And he was a value contract for all those seasons. $4.25 million compared to what he gave, the Avalanche, what he would have still given in Toronto. They didn't find the right deal for him. And I think that is a huge misstep that this front office has made. I think they've made lots of great decisions too. But that one haunts them. And because Kadri, he lives for a chip on his shoulder. Maybe that helped him. Honestly, maybe that propelled him in a way.
Sometimes you've seen it in other athletes. In every sport, it does it.
Right. I mean, maybe he doesn't reach that height. I mean, he was on pace. He would have had a 100-point season last year if he was healthy all year. At his age, to break through in that way is not happening much in today's NHL. I mean, most players have their best offensive season by about their 25th birthday nowadays. And he's pushing back Father Time. And so, I'm with you. I like Kadri the person. I've got a lot of time for his family. I know how much he loved being a member of the Leafs, but maybe this helped push him too. Maybe that was a wake-up call.
He's got a great book coming out. Maybe you're going to write it someday. But the title might be that line that he had in that interview at the Stanley Cup final. Right. So let's just go over the Canadian landscape quickly, and I could again chat with you for months here. Calgary may be better. The team that everybody's talked about over the last few years, the Edmonton Oilers, who still have not got to that threshold where everybody, including me, predicts that this team is Stanley Cup final worthy. Are they?
Absolutely. I mean,
you got to think they're better now, what they've done.
They got to the Western Conference final last year. The NHL's playoff system is kind of interesting, right? Yeah. And I know that you've made this point yourself, I've seen on Twitter and the like, but they were fortunate in a sense to get LA in the first round, and LA was up 3-2. So there's a chance we're talking a totally different conversation if the Oilers don't come back and win that series and they beat Calgary. They're overmatched against the Avalanche. But I think that they are growing, and you saw Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on a different level in those playoffs. I think it's fair to call them a cup contender, like a legit cup contender.
We've got the best player in the game.
Right. And we saw that he can even have another level from what's already been an insane level.
Which is crazy.
Exactly. And I wouldn't cap him just yet. Yeah. Is my point is we might see something more the next time.
And the cast is getting better around him. Like the Evander Kane move, bold, seems brilliant.
It does. And I think that, of course, they're going to be active, before the trade deadline. Like the team that's starting this, next season isn't the final product yet. And so they're all in there as they should be.
Better goaltending.
Better goaltending, you would think. I mean, we'll see. Jack Campbell.
You never know.
Goaltending is wild. I think so many GMs that are going to bed having sleepless nights over their goaltending now. I mean, unless you're in Tampa where you got Vasilevsky or Chris Drury, the Rangers GM with Shesterkin, almost everybody else has some degree of uncertainty or maybe they're one injury away from like not having much of a backup plan. I think Jack Campbell should be an improvement for the Oilers, but look, he had a roller coaster last season in Toronto. His highs were incredibly high. I don't pin the Tampa, playoff loss on him. I think he got back to a level that was good enough for them to win that series. But he's not a sure thing. And but I don't think there's a lot of sure things. That's sort of my point here. Is I'm not knocking the Oilers down, but I'm just saying let's see how that goes before we put the crown on them.
We don't have a Canadian division like we had a couple of years ago, but I kind of, you see where I'm going with my theme about Canadian
I like
teams.
that.
And I don't want to lump these three teams, but because for safety of time, just want to talk about them a little bit. And I do find them just a level, just a little bit below. You never know. Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and what they've done to make themselves better for the new season. What have you seen?
Vancouver, I think that they should have higher expectations, right? I mean, last year was a surprise. It ended up, costing some people their jobs. Now they're taking a new approach, but they didn't need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, this same team with the core of it, the Pettersson, Hughes, Thatcher, Demko. I mean, they had success in the NHL bubble. Won a playoff round. I think that they're on the rise, but they still have some cap challenges left over from the previous administration. It's going to be tough for them to make the playoffs, but I won't say impossible. I think Winnipeg, the complaint, if you talk to a Jets fan, will be that they didn't do enough in the offseason. I would say last year was a bit of an aberration. I think that there could have been danger in overreacting. Losing Paul Maurice midseason, he stepped aside, was pretty open about just sort of losing some of the zest for the job. He'd been there a long time too, right?
He didn't last long in the unemployment line.
Well, a lot of people called him.
Yeah.
I do know that. I mean, he had even options last season that he moved past, but he'd been there a long time, right? I think he got to a point where he didn't have any buttons left to push with that group. I think he might have done them a favor in some, sense of that word. I think that they to me they haven't gotten enough out of that core. When they went to the Western Conference Final against Vegas, 5 years ago, everyone thought, okay, and every year they're going to be there, and they haven't really got back to that level. I'm curious to see what Rick Bowness can do with them, and so I don't mind the approach there. I'm not just blowing everything up, trading guys to trade them. I know it's hard to do in a Canadian city because you take a lot of darts. Certainly I don't have them right. I don't have them in that level of cup contender, but I do think it should be a much better year there. And Ottawa, Pierre Dorion said one of the, if not, Brad Treliving maybe trumped them in the end, but Pierre Dorion said a pretty strong summer for the Senators. We've all been wondering what would happen.
They make noise. This is a team that can make noise.
But I
think teams, sorry to interrupt you, I think teams come in and they go, okay, we're playing the Senators. And then the next thing you go, oh, we're going on the bus. We're sitting on the bus. We just lost.
Right. Well, look, they haven't made any noise as an organization for a couple of years, right? They've didn't spend much money. Obviously, they've drafted a lot of promising young kids, but, they haven't insulated them correctly. At least now you see them out there getting Claude Giroux, making the goaltending trades they made, even signing just a veteran free agent, Tyler Mott. They seem like their intention now to compete is a little bit more direct. And, not to make any light of it, but Eugene Melnyk died, earlier this year. I think a lot of people wondered what would happen to this team after him.
Organization in flux?
Well, and at least from a hockey standpoint, I don't have the full answer of where they're going as an organization, but they've shown new intent to compete. I think that, unfortunately for them, they're in a tough division, right? Let's call it as it is. They have to somehow overcome one of Florida, Tampa, Boston, Toronto. Even Buffalo had a strong second half of last year. Detroit, they've got some nice young players, including the reigning Rookie of the Year. It's going to be a tough climb for them in that division, in that landscape, as long as this is the playoff format. But I think that they're going to be a team that's worth watching this season, and that's saying something from where they've been these last few years. Last
but not least, the team over your shoulder, the Maple Leafs, who come in the betting lines as the second best favorite behind the Colorado Avalanche. I don't know how much you play into betting lines early in a hockey season because there clearly are a number of teams that could hoist the cup, but is this the year the Toronto Maple Leafs will finally win a round in the National Hockey League?
Man, you got to tell me, who are they playing?
It's almost unfathomable to think. You think about it, to go that long without winning a playoff run. It's crazy.
Pat Quinn was a coach the last time they won.
That is
a playoff round.
Rest his soul.
I know, great man, Pat. He was always great to deal with when I was a young reporter. But it is crazy, and it's crazy that we're now into year 7 of Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner as sort of the cornerstones of the team. William Nylander, riding shotgun with them, and they haven't come over the hump. Because if you look at the regular seasons, there's been clear improvement, right? They won a division in the Canadian division. They got 115 points last season. That's not an insignificant barrier to clear. They were a dominant team. They outscored Tampa in round 1, 24-23, and lost in 7 games. I recognize why everyone says you got to win a round. I'm not disputing that by any stretch, but they've done everything but win the round. This has to be the year. I know we've probably billed previous seasons that way, but if you go to Puckpedia and call up their site, they have almost no players signed beyond this coming season. I think it's fair to say Kyle Dubas's job is in some degree of question if the program doesn't take a tangible step forward. Auston Matthews needs an extension that he can sign as of July 1st of 2023.
Great article on the website, by the way, on Auston Matthews. Fabulous.
It's going to be a talking point, though, right? Mm-hmm. And let's face it, where Auston Matthews is in his career, he can become an unrestricted free agent in 2024. He's deciding, does he want to stay? And my belief, I should be clear on this now, I think he will stay in Toronto. I think he will sign another deal here. But that's contingent on him believing they have a team that can win. And so I think this really is all the marbles type of season. Unfortunately, nothing matters till game 83. I mean, they have to get to game 83. They have to make the playoffs. I think
it's one thing to be built for the regular season. And I think they were built for the playoffs even last year. But again, we can go back about the playoff format when they would have met Boston, who, by the way, they had to struggle with Boston in the playoffs. But yeah, they seem so close. What's missing? In your mind, what is missing?
Well, this is what concerns me, quite honestly. If you look back at the individual elimination games, like the Game 7s or the Game 5 against Columbus, the do-or-die games, they have not scored any goals. They lose 2-1 to Tampa, right? I believe it's 3-1 with an empty net goal against Montreal. This is a team built to overwhelm you offensively, and when they've gotten to those moments where really it's do you do it or not, they haven't found a way to break through. And I don't put that necessarily squarely on Matthews' shoulders or Marner's shoulders. I mean, I realize everyone's looking around for someone to blame, but I just wonder if they have the right mentality to win those games, if maybe it's a personnel-based thing. I mean, we're going to see a different bottom six of the Leafs this year. I think you're going to see a fourth line that can be physical, that you're not going to ever really count on to score. But my view is they're going to maybe play with a little bit more edge down there and not just older players. I think it's a lot to ask of Wayne Simmons, for example, at this point in his career, but they bring in guys like Zach Aston-Reese and Nick Aubé-Kubel, not necessarily household names, but if you look at sort of the way those guys play, they're forecheckers, they're going to be hard to go against. I think that they need to find maybe a bit of a formula. And look, they also need something great to happen, right? They've missed that moment.
Yeah.
They need one of those players, whether it's their stars that make the money, to have just a crazy series to pull them through. Or, maybe it's Matt Murray or Ilya Samsonov. I mean, we haven't got to the goaltending. Clearly, to me, the biggest question mark for this team is, does that work? I mean, it's a gamble for management. But if whichever of those guys is starting in those games, maybe they need one of them to stand on their head and steal a game. I feel like that's what they've been missing. I mean, they've won. They almost win each series. They can't win that final game. They need a singular performance.
Like a clutch gene or a karma or something and it goes to show you how hard it is too. I don't believe in curses and all that, but I do believe that if you constantly hear something every day, or there is this narrative in your head that you're constantly talking about this streak or slump, I do think that permeates. I think eventually it permeates. Even a young player, old player, now you hold your stick a little tighter. Maybe you don't get those breaks.
I don't care if they have 120 points this year, win the division. I don't even care who they're playing. When it starts game 1 of the playoffs next year, the best players on this team will all be wondering, can we do this? A little bit. It'll be in there somewhere. And obviously these are supremely confident, talented athletes. I mean, every year, that's the other thing, right? Mitch Marner and Auston Matthews have become exactly what they were supposed to be. Mitch Marner is a first-team All-Star in the NHL. Matthews won a Hart Trophy, 2 Rocket Trophies, a Ted Lindsay Award. I mean, these are the kind of individual stars the Leafs have not had since the 60s, essentially.
Yeah.
And so my point is, individually, those guys have held up their end of the bargain. They've become what they were forecasted to be. But as a team, they haven't found a way to get it done. And it's going to be must-view watching when they get in the first round next year. Again, I don't care the opponent. I don't care how great the season goes. They have to find a way to win 4 out of 7.
Well, yeah, your insight is fabulous. I could chat about every team, but it's good to go over the Canadian teams. When we bring you back, we'll have to talk some more. But I do want to get a couple of big picture things as well from you. Is there a surprise team that you see this year in the National Hockey League? Maybe an X-Factor team? That team that, I would say arguably in the last couple of years, Florida Panthers were kind of that team that went, whoa, hey. Is there a team that could catch you like that?
I think the two that jump to mind when you ask is LA and Buffalo. And, LA might not qualify because they did end up making the playoffs last year, so maybe we wouldn't call them quite as out of left field. But I think that they've just slowly been building. They've got a tremendous farm system. They're not counting on like one kid to become a star and then it's going to be great. Like I think that they've slowly under the radar become more of a factor, and I could see them popping this season. I like that they went out and got Kevin Fiala to help offensively because they didn't quite score enough last year. I could see them taking some people by surprise, and to me, Buffalo, they've got similar goaltending questions to the Leafs in a lot of ways. They've Craig Anderson and Eric Comrie as their 2 goaltenders, so it's far from a sure thing about how that will hold up. But I think as a team, they're trending in the right direction. And last year, quite honestly, Rod, in the second half, to me, they were like a story no one was talking about. It was, man, how hard those guys played. And I think Don Granato's a great coach for them. So I think
Owen Power is going to be something else. Too.
Exactly. And Rasmus Dahlin finally became sort of what he was projected to be last year. They finally, I think, are on the track to getting it right in Buffalo. Same problem as Ottawa, tough division and all those sorts of things. But I think that those are the two teams most likely to, make the playoffs and maybe make some noise and go, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
I don't want to make this a viral thing, and I'm not going to ask you a provocative question, but who will be the first coach to be fired? Who's on the hot seat right now? I mean, who's going to struggle?
Well, I think 13 coaches were replaced last year.
Yeah.
So
and a bunch left? In a hurry, yeah.
Who's left? I mean, hard to say. Like maybe you're looking for Sheldon Keefe or something. I don't see that if you look at his record in Toronto.
I think if they struggled early on, for sure that conversation might come up. If there was but you just like you said, I mean, it just doesn't look like a team that's going to struggle.
Well, if they fall back, they go from 115 points to 102. They're still making a playoffs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know it's a tough one to answer.
I just hadn't thought about it in this way before. I mean, maybe Seattle. I know that sounds crazy. Yeah. Dave Haxtell's only had 1 year there. It's an expansion team, but that was really tough first year for them. I could see there being some pressure there. I mean, look, there's a lot of coaches on the sidelines. Like at some point, I have to believe someone's going to call Joel Quenneville and say, "Hey, Joel, do you want to do this again?" I don't know the answer to that question, but he's done a lot of winning behind the bench. Florida's just come back with a new coach. Tampa's fine. I'm just going through the teams that obviously have some expectations on them. Mike Sullivan got a big extension in Pittsburgh. I don't know if there's one guy that's
our old buddy Torts.
But he's new in Philly, right? I mean,
new in Philly.
I don't think anyone's getting fired in their first year on the job. And since there's so many guys on the first year, maybe this will be a little quieter year for the coaches. But big pressure job. I do know that.
Yeah, that's good. You handled that. It could be
I'm not trying to not give you an answer. I'm actually trying to find the guy.
It's a tough one too because it's so early, and you'll revisit that. We'll probably chat in another month, and there will be some teams that will struggle. Is it imperative or important, do you think, to get off to a good start?
Yes, it's so hard to come back. I mean, unfortunately for everyone, the St. Louis Blues went from worst in the league to winning the Cup in 2019. So every team can now point and say, "Hey, we'll get it on track." But that was a great story those Blues authored because nobody does that. And so, I think the first month of the season is huge. By the time you get to U.S. Thanksgiving, I mean, these become almost cliches, but when you look at the numbers, only one or two teams generally that are out of the playoffs come, third week in November can climb in. And so it's a competitive league. It's a very close league. And you don't want to get behind the eight ball. That's why some coaches do lose their job so early.
CJ, we've held you hostage for too long, but I'm going to continue so I do this thing on our Rodcast. It's called the Quick 18. I know you like to golf. So I'm going to ask you 18 questions. There might be more, might be less. I don't really actually. I just randomly throw them out. So you can go long, short, whatever. You could say pass. With apologies to our friend James Duthie and the quiz master. This is not the quiz. And every answer is, by the way, is correct.
I love it.
And you win absolutely nothing. But you'll get a NorthStar.
We need some Rodcast swag, I think.
We got to get that.
Put that logo on a shirt.
Yes, and you're going to be the first one to get it. Okay, you ready? Let's play a quick 18. Okay. Chris Johnston, CJ, your best interview ever.
Ooh. I interviewed the president of Latvia in 2006.
Oh, really?
It was pretty cool. Vaira Vaika Friberga.
And why was that the best interview ever? I mean, first of all, hockey mad country.
Yeah, I was there for the World Hockey Championships, Rod. I was a young reporter, and I had literally, this is how long ago it is, I had a Lonely Planet book. And it said, the president of Latvia, Vaira Vaika Friberga, who was raised in Canada, and I was like, well, I've never heard of this. And I ended up phoning, her press office, and they came and picked me up, and I had to surrender my passport. I went to her house and sat down and spoke with her for an hour. It was one of the coolest experiences of my entire life.
Well, that's a good one. Worst interview ever. We all had bad ones, or when I say worst, not that it was bad for you, but maybe the subject wasn't great. And there are a lot of them.
I had some tough interviews with Phil Kessel over the years. It was he was not the most willing subject.
No.
I was maybe a bit bullheaded at times with my approach to him, and not that we butted heads particularly, but I definitely, some of my worst interviews were usually involved. Phil Kessel, both as a Leaf and then when he went to Pittsburgh too.
How long does it take for you to grow your beard?
Pretty quick. If I shave this, it'd be back with 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Is there ever any food in your beard?
Unfortunately, yes.
Who do you look like without a beard? Like I said, Connor, you got a Conor McGregor kind of thing going.
I've heard Turtle from Entourage. I've gotten that over the years. So,
dude, one of my favorite shows by that. During binge, like our binge pandemic thing, where that's all we did, sit in front of the TV and watch sports. I had never seen Entourage because I was always working, and what a great show that is.
It was a great show. I haven't watched. I'm not up to date on most of the shows, but I've seen that one. And
I love it.
I don't see it myself. I've just heard that over the years.
Turtle.
Without a beard.
Best hockey city.
Montreal.
By the way, my favorite arena to go to. For whatever reason, it's just just got a vibe to it.
The Bell Center is like going to the Vatican if you're Catholic.
Yeah.
That's honestly my view. Like I love it. There's nothing. If I can only cover like one more game the rest of my career, I'd want it to be a Montreal-Toronto game on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
Just the vibe of walking up to the building, eating the hot dogs at the intermission. There's sort of a tradition to it all. It's beautiful. It's poetry.
What's with their hot dogs too? They do that thing with the bun, the butter on the bun. It's crazy. I've never eaten like 10 hot dogs in a sitting, but I probably could there.
You could. I don't know. I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah,
I know they used to have it at the Colisée Pepsi in Quebec City, which is a bit before my time, but I love going to Montreal for a hockey game.
Spectacular. I guess I got to be careful how I phrase this. I was going to say the worst hockey city, but not the best hockey city in your mind. To go to for whatever reason. Your answer is going to be correct.
Right.
You might
Newark.
piss some people off, but
Newark's tough.
Oh yeah.
Just like if you stay near there's not a lot going on.
It's like they almost don't have a town, really, or a city. It's a region. It's an area.
Right. Long Island used to be difficult. Like I respect the passion of Islanders fans, but from the selfish, like coming to cover a game there, like you literally stay in this hotel on the verge of a giant parking lot. Like you could walk to a Chipotle. There was a gun shop next to it, but like there just wasn't a lot going on. I mean, that's the way I'm not saying those are like the worst fans or anything like that, but covering those games are tough. St. Louis is growing on me. I used to find St. Louis. I'd only ever been in the winter time. And then when they went on that cup run in 2019, I got to be there when the weather was nicer. I was like, okay, I'm seeing this city in a different light. Went to a ball game.
Great sports city.
Yeah, awesome sports city. There's really not that many bad ones, and that's not a diplomatic answer. I love going to all the Canadian cities. Some people might say they don't like going to Ottawa because it's in Canada, but I love going to Ottawa. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Winnipeg is.
I'm from Winnipeg, and I can tell you, I heard that all the time. Oh, players will tell you back in the day too, and now it's one of their favorite cities to visit, to play at.
For sure.
But now they used to always go out.
Right.
It was a good city to go out in.
Right.
As other cities, but now they just charter out after, so you don't really get that. They go in, they come out.
Right.
Players don't really go out. Don't really see them going out. Well, they go out when they want.
But you're right. It's far more targeted. It's not like a regular course of action.
Yeah.
They might see 2 months out. Hey, it's on this day. We got the chance.
Best story you've ever written.
Ooh.
Humbly. You've written a lot of great stories. You're a great writer.
That's hard. One of my favorite ones is I grew up with Justin Williams in Coburg, Ontario, and in 2014 when the Kings were on their way to winning the Stanley Cup and he ultimately won the Conn Smythe, I kind of wrote a story about what it was like to observe him, like to actually grow up with someone and see them on that stage. And because maybe it was from the heart, and I was a little nervous to write it, quite honestly, because you don't want to put yourself in a story. But at a time like that, when someone's starring in the playoffs, the challenge when you do my job, Rod, and probably the same when you're broadcasting, is finding new nuggets, right? Everybody's all over them. And I was like, man, I'm sitting on, like, no one, I played against them when I was 6 years old, and none of these. And so that one's probably closest to me.
You got to dig for them. Sometimes they just come to you in the middle of the night, but then you got to dig for them.
Well, someone told me you either want to be first on a story, you want to be the best, or you want to be different. And so if you use that as your bar for that, it was a chance to write something different about him than anyone else could. And that one's probably one of my fondest. And I know his parents didn't mind it afterwards because you're nervous, right? Because, it's not like I don't have special claim to him. I just happen to have been in the right place to know him at that time. That's probably one of my favorites. I've written some longer form stories, but I don't view myself as a writer so much. Like I'm kind of a news guy a little bit, and so
Storyteller. Storyteller, story reporter, insider.
Anytime you can write from the heart, though, I think that's those kind of stories stick with you, and so that particular Justin Williams one is my favorite.
Who was? I think you answered this already, but maybe you haven't. Who was your hero growing up?
My dad.
Oh.
Yeah, my dad. He and I have always had a special connection, and yeah, just really probably followed a lot in his footsteps.
Was he a writer? Was he? Did he?
No,
storyteller?
he worked at a factory, plastics factory, but just a super guy.
Yeah.
And both he and my mom, I was really lucky to have parents that I had that it was a crazy dream to want to be a hockey journalist. Yeah. When I had that dream, I had no ends. My dad basically was done school at age 12. Like I didn't have, but I always had supportive parents who made me believe I could do it. And I'm sitting here and I wouldn't be without them.
Yeah. Well, they must be very proud of you. As a hockey player, CJ, who would you compare your skills to?
Let's think. I put up a lot of points, but I wasn't too flashy. So, who fits that mold?
Not too flashy. Put up a lot of points.
I scored a lot of goals, but wasn't going end to end to do it.
So were you like a Timmy? You weren't like a Timmy Kerr because you'd have a smaller. Not knocking your height, but you were smaller Timmy Kerr.
I was pretty feisty too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
bulldog, like Conor McGregor stuff.
I always had a chip on my shoulder. I was smaller. I mean, I'm not sure if there's anyone quite in today's game.
Yeah, the most of the smaller players, smallish players, are pretty flashy.
Right.
I
didn't have like elite skills, but I just always had this weird knack to find the puck around there.
Yeah. Well.
So I haven't given you a good answer, but that was I actually once scored
correct.
3 goals in 21 seconds.
What?
Is my
Billy
claim to fame.
Mosienko?
Yep.
You pulled a Mosienko?
Yep. In Pee Wee.
Well, what was that, a video game?
No, it wasn't.
Pee Wee where?
In Coburg, and it's funny.
2 empty netters?
No, it was not.
That got it.
It's not. And what's funny is the article is actually in the Coburg Sports Hall of Fame now. About it.
Dude, give me some.
Yeah, and we were down in the third period. I scored the goals to make us go from 4-2 down to 5-4, and we won the game 6-4.
Billy Mosienko, for those of you who don't know, Billy Mosienko, still a record that I don't think will ever be beaten.
No.
3 goals, 21 seconds. Winnipegger, that's why I know him.
Right.
Got to meet him later. He had a bowling alley. I just knew him as a bowling guy. Then I saw 3 goals, 21 seconds.
Yeah.
So what kind of goals? Quickly, what kind of goals?
It was like lightning striking. I mean, obviously the first goal was a goal, and then we went off the face-off twice, and both times I came in and scored. To score 3 goals in 21 seconds is not much time to play with.
Maybe the time clock wasn't working. It might have been 3 and 19.
I'm still wondering, who knows? That's the thing.
Yeah.
And also, why did my coach not take me off the ice? I mean, usually you score a goal and you're the next line's up. So,
Jeez, CJ, that's crazy. Best movie ever. Your favorite movie?
Tin Cup.
Oh, I like that.
I love Tin Cup.
Who is this Roy McAvoy?
But I always liked sports movies mostly.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, I loved the Mighty Ducks movies. I loved Happy Gilmore.
Yeah. Happy Gilmore is fantastic. Slapshot.
A little before my time. Like I wouldn't put that in my favorites, but I liked the movie.
I think it's kind of sad actually. Like you think of sports movies, I love them all. Like the Rudies.
Yeah.
Bull Durham, obviously Field of Dreams.
If I'm watching a Rudy too, honestly, by the end, I'm sitting there on my couch crying.
Oh,
I don't know why. Just all those hit me all in the feels. Those
I met that dude the real Rudy Rudiger, a few years ago in Halifax. He's nowhere near what the Rudy was like. This guy. But there really hasn't been, beyond Slapshot, which is funny, a really great hockey movie.
Not really. No.
There's something for you to write. Let's get to collaborate. We'll get a hockey movie. No, there hasn't been one. There isn't a tearjerker, Youngblood, maybe, but that was like so long ago.
Right, and then there's like some goofier ones in modern time.
Yeah.
But like, no, there's not really.
I mean, Happy Gilmore is kind of a hockey golf movie.
Yeah.
There isn't.
No.
It hasn't really, and that might be the American audience though.
Right.
Because in Canada, we would eat that up.
It'd be hard to sell that maybe, but let's get on it.
Yeah, I remember growing up, Face Off was a big one. My buddy Art Hindle was in that.
Oh, yeah. I remember that movie.
Yeah.
They were at the Igloo in Pittsburgh, and there's all sorts of goofy stuff in there.
Okay, only a couple more. What did you realize? Was there any epiphany that you had, or just a perspective during COVID?
Oh, man. I mean, I looked at everything in my life, honestly. It was a really hard time for me. I'm sure for a lot of people. I mean, I was lucky. I kept my jobs and stuff like that, but it just having the whole world stop, the world that I was living in, traveling and all that. So I don't know if I had one epiphany. I think it gave me clarity, though, that life is really short. It gave me a chance to stop and, jump off the treadmill, so to speak, or the hamster wheel, and just be like, do what you want to do. And so I made a lot of life changes during that period, and it really centers back to what I realized is I can't just live someone else. I can't be living on autopilot. I can't be living someone else's life. I got to take ownership of everything right now.
If you were the commissioner of the National Hockey League, you probably heard this one before, and everybody has an iteration of this question. What would there be a change, and what change would you make if you could to the NHL?
I would change
maybe the biggest one.
I would change the playoff format yesterday. It's just a pet peeve. I mean,
Commissioner Johnston.
Here's the thing. This is my only thought on it. If you're going to play 82 games, which is a lot of regular season games, it really has to matter. And I feel like there's too much chance, and there's been too many instances where, and it's been different divisions, but like 3 of the top 5 teams in the league are at the top of one division, and those teams all have to play each other in the first 2 rounds. I think it makes for sometimes a compelling first 2 rounds, but you're not necessarily getting the best teams represented in the end. And so I understand why they do it, because they love the rivalries. They love the idea that Pittsburgh and Washington have played, and we had a Toronto-Montreal series, whatever. But I in the Battle of Alberta last year, for example, but I just think don't force it. Ideally, you'd really go to 116. Honestly, if you want to make it fair, but 1-8 in each conference, I liked a lot better.
And I think it makes the battles for 8 a little more important, or that battle for 1. It just seemed... to me, it's nonsensical. What they have right now, it's illogical, and so why do that?
I'd also put a wild card in.
Yeah,
I'm a big baseball fan, Rod, and we're getting here to the end of the season. Like, I love those wild card games.
I love it too.
I would have 7 play 10 and 8 play 9 in some version of wild card to basically determine the bottom seeds in the conference.
And make that wild card like they're doing in baseball, because they don't want the wild card winning. But make it a little more prohibitive for them to pull off an upset. They have to come from a long way. If you're going to be a Cinderella, be the ultimate Cinderella.
Right. I've actually seen some proposals where if you're 10, you almost have to beat 9 and then beat 8 and then beat 7. Some version of that, so that the idea of the 10 team doesn't just have to get lucky on one game. But I just think that we should expand the playoffs, because there's just not that much between the teams.
So I always end these quick 18s with this question, and it could be a thing or a person, the answer, but I want you to finish the sentence if you can. I, CJ, Chris Johnston, Commissioner Johnston, owe the success in my life to
passion, hard work, and some good fortune.
I like those answers. Passion, hard work, good fortune. That's you, man. Thank you for being here. It's
been fun.
Yeah,
it's been great.
It's been great. I could talk with you all day, and let's do it again.
Yeah, invite me back to your living room, and I'll be here, brother.
Yeah, quite a basement I got here. Thanks, everybody. Chris Johnston, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Rodcast.
The Rodcast with Rod Black, brought to you by NorthStar Bets. That's a win.